Well, Grace Point Church family, I thought I'd just bring you a brief message reminding you in the midst of all the bad news in our world today that there is still good news and God is still at work. And so I want you to be encouraged. I know there's so much bad news out there, whether it's local bad news or international bad news, whether it's what has happened in Haiti or Afghanistan, and we've all been in angst about that and are praying for those regions, or whether locally here now with the new mask mandates of even the last couple days that have come out from the public health orders. And it's easy for fear to just rise within us. It's easy for anxiety to take over when we see what's coming across our screens on our social media feeds or our news feeds. And it's so easy for the bad news to set the mood for our day or to set our outlook on life. And I want us to just kind of elevate and see our world from God's perspective. Because as followers of Jesus, we are people of good news. That's what the gospel literally translates into, good news. Now, that wasn't invented by some first century marketing team to put a spin on something that was bad news. They genuinely believed, the first Christians, that this was good news, the gospel. And so I remind you today, church family, that Jesus is Lord. He reigns on the throne. He is sovereign. He is in control. And so I would say, don't get pulled down. Don't get pulled down into the debates around masks and no masks and public health orders and vaccination card passports and all the other things and various ideologies that are arising now. It's easy to get pulled down into that. And I remind you that Jesus is Lord. And we fix our eyes and our mind upon Him. And that gives us hope because we are good news people. I mentioned Afghanistan earlier, and my heart, like yours, has been broken about what is happening in Afghanistan. I continue to pray for that country daily. But I don't know if you realize that Afghanistan has been the second fastest growing church in the world. Has been in the country of Afghanistan. In July, the church is registered with the government. You say, yeah, but what's happening now with the Taliban? I don't know. But I believe that God is in control and we can trust Him, even in the midst of that awful, horrific stuff that's happening over there. And I think back to when we went through the book of Daniel, sometime prior to COVID, a couple years ago. And there was that verse in there about the evil King Nebuchadnezzar. And it says that King Nebuchadnezzar was a servant of God. I believe the Taliban is a servant of God in the sense that God still rules and reigns. And He is drawing people to Himself, whether in Afghanistan or here, amongst all that's happening in our world. I've been recently reading through the book of Mark, and I've been looking at Jesus from both the human perspective and the divine perspective. And I've just been struck again of Jesus' power and authority, like over the demonic. In Mark 5, I just stopped as I was reading there about that man who is filled with a legion of demons. And I thought, what's his story? What's his history? What did he do? What happened to him that this came about? But then the good news, Jesus freed him. And he was different. And that same Jesus who I'm reading about in the book of Mark is the same Jesus who reigns on the throne today. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But sometimes we're like John the Baptist when he was in prison and he wondered, because he looked at his circumstances and his surroundings. Life in prison wasn't good under King Herod, and the outcome wasn't very good. And so he doubted. And he sent some of his disciples to Jesus and asked the question, are you the one, or should we be looking for someone else? We wonder the same. Where are you, God? Is there someone else? Is there something else? And I want to read for you a couple encouraging verses from the book of Matthew. When Jesus replies back to John the Baptist, he says this. Jesus replied, go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Jesus is good news. And God is at work in our world today. Let me share a couple things with you that I've read about recently. That the fastest growing church in the world today is in Iran. God is at work in that Middle Eastern country. In Africa, in the last 7 years, 6,000 new churches have been planted among Muslim people in 18 different countries. Some former imams are boldly and at great risk to themselves leading these churches. There may be 1 million Muslim people coming to faith in Jesus Christ each and every year. Incredible. It's like we're living in the book of Acts again. The largest church planting movement in the world today is happening in India. God has raised up many, many church planters there, including one 19-year-old young adult who Jesus set free from demon oppression, and he has now planted 8 different churches. God is at work. And our church, Grace Point, will be partnering with MB Mission as we bring a church planter from India over to the Lower Mainland here. Friends, be encouraged. I'm encouraged by the things that are happening locally also. I'm convening a meeting as we talk about our own community dinner and the future of that with other churches here on the peninsula and how we can together solve the problem of food insecurity in our region. The kingdom of God. I'm encouraged by the baptisms that we have had this summer, and we'll be having another one on September 12th. Speaking of community dinner, this past Wednesday, Jenna came up to me and she said, oh, you were in a meeting, but there was a fellow here who wanted to speak to you. And she said he wanted to let you know that he had become a Christian. And I said, have you seen him before? Does he come regularly? And she said, no, I've never met him before. But he wanted to let you know. I thought, wow, God is at work in our midst. And I'll be looking for him next Wednesday and looking forward to having him being discipled in our church community. Because regardless of restrictions and what's happening in our world, our vision to be a movement of disciples who make disciples continues on. Nothing holds back or restricts the gospel, the good news. So be encouraged in that, friends. God is at work. And when you find yourself getting dragged down into the daily spin of the news cycle or your social media cycle, look up. Jesus is the lifter of the head. Look up to him and what he is doing. God is at work. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday, whether in person or online.